Hey, welcome back to the Secret Underground Lair. So today we are putting on our 1.3 tooth per inch, 1 inch blade onto the Worktable Sawmill. So I got some tools laid out, and you'll notice I have a lot of tools laid out. And if I went back and did this again, I would probably be a little bit more consistent in my selection of the bolts and screws and so on that hold this thing together. But this was an evolutionary process. It is what it is. It works. So we'll change the blade and get on with a big beam that I want to cut into in half. That is today's adventure. So I start the process by removing this shroud that exists at this end of the blade guard. And I have a little screw that kind of keeps this from tilting around, and then inside I've got a quarter 20 bolt, which is a little bit awkward to get to because I have to come in, hold the head of it in here. A bit tricky getting into it. And then the bolt is on the other side over here, or the nut is on the other side. And kind of behind some bracketry and so on, so it becomes a little bit awkward. I've got the nut off. There's a little lock washer that goes on here as well. Pull that off. Push the bolt through a bit. Now this will pivot right off. Okay, that end. Next bit of the blade guard is held in, this guy here is held in by 3 screws here, 3 screws here, and then 2 bolts at the other end that kind of give some stability a little bit farther along. So I can take those screws out simply with this tool. And finally, going to loosen the 2 nuts down here at this end. And hold the bracket here on. So our blade guard is now loose. There we are, blade guard is removed. So we're looking at the sawmill from the other side now, clearly. I want to spend a minute just talking about the tensioning mechanism. So this idler wheel is held in place by 2 bolts that go right through this block, and there is some adjustability on the block that can slide both ways. And further, there's a tensioning mechanism underneath here. So by loosening that jam nut, I can unscrew this bolt to allow the blade to come back, or I can tighten the bolt to move it forward. And that's how I get tension on the blade. And I can make it pretty tense. So this one is, we just have about 1/4 of an inch flex on the blade, which is what we want. That's tighter than what I had before. In fact, I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to that when I put the new blade on and make sure that it is properly taut. So I'm going to loosen off this, loosen these 2 bolts underneath here, and then that'll allow that to slide back, and I can take the blade right off. That's loosened up the blade enough that I can just slip it off. And I'm going to put on some leather gloves for this operation. Blade removed. Okay, brought you back over to this side to see the blade going on. And keep in mind, this is the first time I have put on a blade of this size, so a little bit of learning going on here. And right away I can see that I want to move that bearing back a fair bit, so I'm going to do that, especially on this side. So I was able to move the bearing back such that the blade blocks, or the guide blocks, are sitting just inside this back edge of the blade and away from the tooth, where the tooth would start to kerf up. So our blade block is kind of running from about here up to about here. So that's the area that is guiding the blade. And I did the same thing on both sides. So adjustable bearing blocks, adjustable bearings. Oh, that's a good thing. All right, now I'm going to tension up the blade. So I'll set you back on the stand here, and you can pay attention as this portion of the blade tightens up. All right, I'm pretty happy with that pressure. That tension rather. So I will now tighten up our blocks everywhere. It's back in business. Okay, with the blade guides readjusted, and reinsert the blade guard. Sometimes think that those 6 screws are a little bit of overkill, but this is a blade spinning around pretty fast and it's really sharp, so I'm okay with a little overkill there. Okay, that's that end of the blade guide in place. The blade guard in place. Blade guides are adjusted to deal with the tracking of the blade as it spins. I'm very happy with that. So now I'll just put on this end down here, this end to hold the dust shroud. Hindsight being 2020, I probably would have designed that a little differently. But I'm not going to go for a redesign right now. Okay, we're all set. I'm going to rewind. I keep calling it rewind the saw. Take the saw back to our starting position, and I'll go bring in our log. Our beam, actually. It's not really a log. Got our beam put up here, and at this end of it there's a fair bit of rot, so I'm going to wind up cutting off from about here. So I'm cutting off about 12 inches of this, We get a measurement, see how big this beam is. 10 inches by 10 inches. It's 6 feet from one end of the rotten part to this end of the rotten part. I'm going to cut it off about here. That's at about 4 foot, a little over 4'6". And I may wind up taking a little bit off that end as well. So let me start by cutting off this section. It's making me a little nervous here. I'm seeing some ants come out of this, and I think we have a carpenter ant infestation in this. This is a cedar post. Amazing to think, this must have been some big tree, a 10 by 10 cedar post here, but yeah, we got a whole bunch of rot happening right here. There's another guy. Let me bring you over. So we got a whole thing going on here, some activity in here, a whole bunch of activity here, which you can see manifesting over here as well. I've had a few ants come bombing out of this, so I'm not really hopeful for this log. There's a little guy, he just went in that hole. So there he is. Going for more. So clearly these bugs are making a home in here. And I'm not happy about this. So I flipped the log around, that's the end I cut off, and I ripped off that, I took that section that I cut off and ripped it into quarters with the chainsaw. And I didn't see a lot of infestation like we had with the cedar pole. So I'm thinking the the carpenter ant damage may be limited, enough that I will cut this in half and see what we get. But on this end, I do see some dry rot. So I'm going to cut this off about here, just to get rid of all this stuff that's at the back. Here's another one of our little other bug friends that we get a lot of. So we'll cut this off with the chainsaw and then put this on the sawmill and cut it in half. All right, so I cut off the rotten parts of the log, at least most of it. What we're left is a log that's just a little over 3'6", 10 inches by 10 inches. I'm going to cut it right in half to give us a 10 by 5. The intention is that this will be made into 2 benches. The pieces that I cut off, I did rip them down further with the chainsaw and then with the bandsaw. And the wood that's in this is incredible. It is an old growth cedar, like a slow growth cedar. The grain is really tight. It is beautiful. So we'll cut this apart and just see what we get. I hope that we don't have too much bug trouble in there. I'll also point out that while ripping it apart, I did uncover a nail. Fortunately, I didn't hit it with the chainsaw, but a little fragment of a nail. So I've taken a quick look at the seam where I'm going to be cutting. I don't see any nails. So I'm hoping that we get away with one here. But it would make me very hesitant to rip this into anything more than just this split in half. So I'll set up the camera and we can go through this with our new blade. Complete. Peel this off and see what we get. First observation is it's a pretty nice clean cut. I'm quite happy with it. A little bit of undulation I had as it went through some knots. So I think I was pushing the blade a little bit too fast. So I'm going to keep it probably around 65 That seems to be a sweet spot. It just went, that new blade just went through this like butter though. Here's another little friend. Yeah, the blade just went through this like butter. Hardly even knew it was there. So really impressed. Might go get some Ant Be Gone and just spray some of the holes in the end of this log just to be sure that we don't have any further activity there. But that is a nice looking piece of cedar. Some very interesting character marks through here and here. Yeah, it's a nice looking piece of wood. Apart from this little bit of wood rot, that's looking good. And I'm happy that we don't have any carpenter ant activity through the center of this piece at all. So that's good news as well. Also happy I didn't hit any nails on the way. That's nice to know too. So overall, new blade is a success. Yeah, got a beam. Now we have a couple benches, raw benches in the works. So I am going to call that a video for today. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.